it is, as I said earlier in the program, we are still waiting for another, 9 days? Is it 10? Before we actually find out the final composition of the election result. And one would presume that therefore, as a consequence of that, we'll know what the centre-right coalition government will look like, at least in its broad sense. I'm not sure that we'll know on Friday, the 3rd of November, what the coalition will look like in terms of its detailed composition, its policy or its membership. But everybody's gone to ground. I don't blame them for that, to be perfectly honest with you. But somebody who hasn't, thank God, and who is talking and who is seeking, I have to say, to be quite responsible and to ensure that political stability accompanies this period is the leader of the ACT Party, David Seymour, and he joins us now. David, welcome to the show. Good morning to you. You must find this a bit unsettling too, must you, or not?
Well, it's a strange thing that we're a developed first world country, apparently, but it's taking now 3 weeks to count these votes. We normally look at countries, most recently the US, and say they have all these trouble counting their votes, and here we are waiting for 3 weeks. So I can understand people pretty frustrated with that. We're trying to use the time to put together as much as we can of an agreement so that we're ready to respond to what those final results are. Because I know, if you think about the challenges that have built up over the last 6 years, in fact, I would argue longer than that, we're going to need a government that can roll up its sleeves and hit the ground running to start solving problems straight away.
Yeah, you are. But I have to say, though, it seems absurd. Was it 20 days it's going to be from when the election result or the preliminary result to when the final result comes? Is that something you're going to look into, to be honest with you, David, to say this is ridiculous, this is not in the best interest of democracy, as to why that delay is there?
Yes, I mean, we know why it is. It's because the Electoral Act amendments that Labor and Greens pushed through to change the donation laws and a bunch of other things at the end of last year. Actually, I think it was earlier this year. No, it was the end of last year, sorry. It allowed them 3 weeks rather than 2 to count the special votes. So they're basically just taking their sweet time. And I guess in a way, you have to admire what they are required to do. They have to take every vote at every place in the country and get it back to the returning officer of the correct electorate. So if you're somebody from the Epsom electorate and you finished school, you registered at your parents' house, and you went down to Otago and you just forgot to update your address, then you go into the polling booth at Otago Uni and you cast a vote for Epsom, then the Electoral Commission has to actually get your vote back to where it should be, and they have to do that in every direction for 70 or 80 odd electorates and overseas. So it's quite a task that they have. But I just point out that they've managed to do it in 2 weeks for the last 9 or 10 elections under MMP, and suddenly it's got a whole lot harder. I don't think that's reasonable. I can see why people are frustrated.
So you're saying that the reason for the delay isn't the inefficiency necessarily of the Electoral Commission, although that could be there, but it is because of those legislative changes that actually gave them that period of time in which to come up with the result?
Well, it's both. I mean, like I just said, it is a big logistical job that they have. But when the government put through changes the end of last year, the Labor and Greens, that is, voted for this. We didn't. They made changes that allowed the Electoral Commission an extra week to process the special. So that's a bit of the background. And your question, what would we do about it? I think we'd look at making it 2 weeks again. But again, I'm just a bit cautious because I'm not one of those politicians who wants to get in and micromanage the system by which we're elected. That's not such a good thing either. But certainly it seems to me the way the Electoral Commission has been focused on everything but the real basic stuff, print the letters, send them out, print the stickers. I mean, I saw someone voted in London, they got a sticker, but they didn't seem to manage to get the stickers printed in New Zealand. I think it's really emblematic of what's been going on in the public service generally. They've got all sorts of objectives except for those very basic ones.
Well, I'm glad you raised that issue, because after 8 o'clock this morning we'll be talking to Professor Jonathan Boston for Victoria University, who's been critical of both yours and, ACT's and National's policy to reduce public servants, and is suggesting that this may in some shape or form compromise the ability of the public sector to deliver services. There's been a 17%, I think, increase, you'd know better than I, David, increase in public servants since 2017. Do you think that his fears have any legitimacy at all?
No, I don't. Just not to be a know-it-all, but it's actually about 29% increase in the core public service. It's really important just to differentiate. We're not talking about cops, we're not talking about teachers or nurses or doctors or corrections officers or anyone other than people that work in core agencies. So you look at MB, Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment, gone up from about 3,500 to 5,800, another 2,300 people working in there. But if you talk to anyone who's actually trying to run a business, you say, gee, has your life got easier? Has it got easier to run a business? Because, you've had about a 2/3 increase in the number of MB bureaucrats. No. Ministry of Education, 2,500 when Labor came in. Now about 4,400, nearly doubled in size. The Ministry of Education, every principal I talk to, and in the Epsom Electorate, I try and meet every principal every year. 30 of them, and they never tell me that life's getting easier because the Ministry of Education's expanded. So, he's just wrong if he thinks that we need all of these extra people. The government functioned perfectly well with 15,000 fewer bureaucrats in 2017, and I think a starting point should be to get back to that. And if they say there's a whole lot of stuff we can't do anymore, well, maybe we need to start asking ourselves, is it really necessary to do it? Just give you one example, pretty obscure one, but the Film Commission, whose job is to hand out money to people who want to make films, and we can argue, should the government be subsidising that, and how should they subsidise them and all the rest, but let's just assume that that's something the government needs to do. Well, talk to people in the film industry. 20 years ago, they had 15 staff to evaluate applications and give them the money. Now they have nearly 60 staff, and they're giving up the same amount of money. So if you want to talk about productivity, that's an example of a government department that appears to be 3 times less productive in fact 4 times less productive than it was 20 years ago. This is why we feel like we're going backwards. Now, of course, that slack has to be taken up by households and businesses up and down the country who are finding it harder to stand still because they're subsidising all this stuff. So, no, Jonathan Boston's wrong. And the other thing he'll attack us on is ACT has said that chief executives of government departments should have a contract with the minister and key performance indicators and performance pay. So if you're the chief of the Ministry of Social Development, you're responsible for giving out about $30 billion in pensions and benefits. We want to see people getting off benefits into work and staying in work. But if you, the chief executive of MSD, you don't actually get paid more in return for getting people off benefits into work. You don't really get paid less if more people are on benefits for longer, which is what's happened. Now, we've said that person should have a really clear contract, and just like the chief executive of any company on the NZX 50 should get paid more if they perform and maybe fired if they don't. Jonathan Boston is in the paper this morning saying, if we're hiring people that respond to financial incentives, we're hiring the wrong people. They should be there for the public spiritedness of serving the nation and the government and the community. Well, it all sounds like great stuff, but that's not how business works. It's not how human nature works, and it hasn't worked for the taxpayer either.